Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වලකයි.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday, the 10th of January, 2023. Approved. The Cabinet green-lights the implementation of electricity tariff revision. Effective January 1st. The revision is scheduled to be reviewed by the PUCSL before 15th February. Export-oriented. Government plans to call expressions of interest to establish an oil refinery for export and related product processing centre. Alliance. The UNP decides to join hands with the SLPP to contest the upcoming local government election, says General Secretary Palitha Rangabandara. Not the only way. Economist Howard Nicholas will join us live to evaluate Sri Lanka's alternative solutions for economic recovery.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Indivadi Amuata. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. We take a look at your top stories tonight. Sri Lanka plans to call expressions of interest to establish an export-oriented oil refinery and related product processing centre in Hambantota. Now, the decision was made after identifying a higher level of foreign interest in establishing an oil refinery in Sri Lanka for export purposes. Meanwhile, Cabinet spokesperson Dr. Bandula Gunawardena said the President has instructed to curtail 5% of the estimated expenditure allocated under Budget 2023 to all ministries due to severe depletion of funds in the Treasury.
At present, there's only a single oil refinery established in Sri Lanka, which is owned by the state-run Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. Located in Sapagaskanda, it refines crude oil that is sufficient only to cater 25% of the country's fuel requirement. Refined fuel from the Sapagaskanda oil refinery is not exported abroad, meaning there's no export-oriented refining process operational at the country's only refinery. Due to the existence of higher foreign interest for an investment, the government has decided to issue notices calling expressions of interest in order to select a suitable investor for establishing an oil refinery in the proximity of Hambantota and to call for detailed proposals from investors who meet fundamental qualifications.
හම්බන්තොට ආශ්‍රිතව අපනයනය අරමුණු කරගත් ඛනිජතෙල් පිරිපහදුවක් සහ ආශ්‍රිත නිෂ්පාදන සැකසුම් මධ්‍යස්ථානයක් ස්ථාපනය කිරීමේ ඉහළ විභවතාවයක් තිබෙන බව හඳුනාගෙන තියෙනවා. එකී ආයෝජන අවස්ථාව උපයෝග කර ගැනීම පිණිස විවිධ පාර්ශ්වයන් හා විදේශ ආයෝජකයන් විසින් උනන්දුවක් දක්වලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ අනුව හම්බන්තොට ආශ්‍රිතව ඛනිජතෙල් පිරිපහදුවක් ස්ථාපිත කිරීම සඳහා සුදුසු ආයෝජකයෙක් තෝරා ගැනීම සඳහා අභිලාෂ කැඳවීමේ නිවේදනය නිකුත් කිරීමටත් ඒ අතුරින් මූලික සුදුසුකම් සපුරන ආයෝජකයන්ගේ විස්තරාත්මක යෝජනා ලබා ගැනීම පිණිස විදුලි බල බලශක්ති අමාත්‍යාංශයට කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලය විසින් අවසරය ලබා දුන්නා. ඒ අනුව අපිට බලාපොරොත්තුවක් තබා ගන්න පුළුවන් හම්බන්තොට ආශ්‍රිතව ඛනිජ තෙල් පිරිපාදුවක් සඳහා විදේශ ආයෝජකයන් පැමිණෙනු ඇති බවට.
Meanwhile, Cabinet spokesperson Dr. Bandula Gunawardena said the potential income that may be earned through taxes within the first few months of 2023 has greatly reduced owing to the grave economic crisis that Sri Lanka saw in 2022, and as a result, the Treasury is currently facing a severe depletion of funds worse than what was anticipated.
ජනවාරි පෙබරවාරි මාර්තු වැනි මාසවල රජයට බදු මගින් ලැබෙන ආදායම විශාල ලෙස පහත ගියත් අත්‍යවශ්‍යම දැරිය යුතු වියදම් දරන්නට සිද්ධ වෙනවා. රාජ්‍ය සේවක වැටුප්, විශ්‍රාම වැටුප්, රාජ්‍ය ණය සඳහා ගෙවන පොලි, වෙනස් සුබසාධන වියදම් වැනි එදිනෙදා පවත්වාගෙන යාමේ වියදම් දැරීමට ප්‍රමාණවත් කිසිදු ආදායමක් භාණ්ඩාගාරයට නැහැ. ඒ නිසා ප්‍රධාන ගැටලුව ලෙස මුහුණ දීලා තියෙන්නේ සෑම මාසයකම අග රාජ්‍ය සේවක වැටුප් ගෙවීමෙන් ඒ වැටුප් බිල සහ විශ්‍රාම වැටුප් ජ්‍යෙෂ්ඨ පුරවැසියන්ට ගෙවන සඳහා තමයි ප්‍රමුඛතාවය ලබා දෙන්නේ. මේ වර්ෂයේ පුරාවටම මේ ආදායම් ගැටලුව පවතින නිසා කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට දැනුම් දුන්න සියලුම අමාත්‍යාංශවල අයවැය ලේඛනයේ මගින් වෙන් කර තියෙන මුදල් වලින් 5% කපා හරින. ඊළඟට ජනවාරි මාසයේදී වැටුප් ගෙවීම පිළිබඳ පවතින දුෂ්කරතාවය නිසා සමෘද්ධි සහන ආධාර ගෙවීම සතියකට දෙකකට කෙටි පමාවක් සිද්ධ වෙන්න ඉඩ තිබෙන බව එතුමා කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට දැනුම් දුන්නා.
State Minister of Finance Shahant Semasinghe reassures that those employed in the state sector do not have to harbour any undue fears regarding the payment of government employees' salaries or welfare benefits, including Samurdhi payments. Semasinghe went on to say that government employees' salaries, pensions and welfare benefit schemes are being prioritised. The minister went on to say that even though the country's economy is at a stable level, the government is unable to come out of the crisis completely unless the required program to overcome the crisis is implemented in full. He added that payments are provided from the Treasury for necessary priorities in order to manage government revenue and expenditure. Meanwhile, the State Minister also highlighted that an orderly and efficient arrangement to settle the bills that are due from the government side for certain projects is currently under discussion with relevant ministries. Well, President Ranil Wickremesinghe informed the Cabinet of Ministers that new laws will be introduced in order to achieve socio-economic, cultural and political progress in the country within the next 25 years. As per the plan, new institutions are also expected to be established for the purpose, along with the implementation of new projects.
As per the plan to achieve socio-economic, cultural and political progress, several institutions including the Institution of History, Institute of Economic and Trade, Institute of Women and Gender, University of Government and Government Policies, University of Agricultural Technology, University of Climatic Changes and University of Sports will be established within the next 25-year period. Further, this plan will also introduce new laws, including the National Commission on Women's Act, Gender Equality Act, Women Empowerment Act, Child Protection Act, and an Act on Climatic Changes. Further, Commission on Social Equality Act, Reforestation and Forest Cover Act, and Live Entities Act to protect River Mahaveli, Singharaja Forest Reserve, Sripada Conserve, Horton Plains, Knuckles Reserve, and Adams Bridge is expected to be introduced by the government. The Cabinet also said laws for oceanic resources expedition and management, and an Act on Muthurajawala conservation, an Act to protect the differently abled persons will also be brought into effect in the future. The 25-year program also aims on implementing several new projects that include 75 urban forests, 1996 houses from Colombo for low-income families, and programs on the National Youth Platform in order to achieve socio-economic, cultural and political progress.
The Cabinet of Ministers approved the implementation of electricity tariff revision effective from the 1st of January this year. The proposed revision is scheduled to be reviewed by the Public Utilities Commission before the 15th of February. The Cabinet says if the PUCSL submits any amendments, the Ceylon Electricity Board will take measures to implement the amendments and make necessary adjustments to the future monthly electricity bills of the public.
Early last month, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said the Ceylon Electricity Board is unable to provide an uninterrupted power supply to the public during the year 2023 at the current rate of electricity tariffs. As per a report shared by the Minister on Twitter, CEB has estimated that the production cost of an electricity unit this year will be 56 rupees. If an electricity unit is provided at the current selling price of 29 rupees, the report shows a loss of 29 rupees from each electricity unit. With that being the case, the Minister says a cost-reflective tariff mechanism is essential to avoid power interruptions. Last week, the Minister presented the proposed tariff hike prepared by the Ceylon Electricity Board to the Cabinet. However, the consideration of the proposal was extended until yesterday by the Cabinet for further observations. At the Cabinet meeting last evening, the Cabinet approved the presented electricity tariff proposal and ordered it to be referred to the Public Utilities Commission for further observations. And if any revision is required, they will be informed to submit their recommendations on or before 15th of February. Until then, the Cabinet has permitted Ceylon Electricity Board and the Public Utilities Commission to take necessary measures to implement the proposed electricity tariff revision with effect from 1st of January 2023 as an interim measure in accordance with the amendments to the public policy guidelines currently in force regarding the power industry. The Cabinet said if the PUCSL submit any amendments, the Ceylon Electricity Board will take steps to implement those amendments and make the necessary adjustments to further monthly electricity bills.
මහජන උපයෝගීතා කොමිසම විසින් මීට වඩා වෙනස් සානදායි නිර්දේශයක් ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න පුළුවන් නම් ඒව ඉදිරිපත් කරන්නටත් ඒ සඳහා අවශ්‍ය වෙනස්කම් කරන්නටත් අනුමැතිය ඇතිව ජනවාරි 1 වෙනිදා ඉඳලා දක්වපු විදුලි ගාස්තු සංශෝධනය ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම සඳහා ඊයේ දිනේදී කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලය අනුමැතිය ලබා දුන්නා. දැනට ක්‍රියාත්මක කරලා මහජන උපයෝගීතා කොමිසම කියනවා නම් ඒකේ යම්කිසි අඩු කිරීමක් කරන්නට කියලා. ඒ ගැළපුම ඉදිරි බිල්පත් මගින් කරන්න එකඟ වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයේ ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් ලෙස දැනුම් දුන්නා. 2023 වර්ෂයේ විදුලිය කප්පාදුවකින් තොරව අඛණ්ඩව මහජනතාවට විදුලි බලය ලබා දිය යුතු බවත් මිල වෙනස්කම් සිද්ධ වෙන විට කියන්නේ ලෝක වෙළඳ පොලේ ගල් අඟුරු මිල, ඛනිජ තෙල් මිල වෙනස් වුණොත්, එහෙම නැත්නම් වර්ෂාව අධික ලෙස ලැබීම කරනකොට විදුලියේ වියදම් අඩු වුණොත්, ඒ අඩුවීමේ වාසිය පාරිභෝගිකයන් ලබා දෙන්න බලශක්තිය ඇමතුමාට කිව්ව මිල සූත්‍රයක් සෑම මාස 6කටම වරක් ඛනිජ තෙල් වලට වගේ විදුලි බලයටත් මිල සූත්‍රයක් හඳුන්වා දෙන ලෙසත් උපදෙස් දුන්නා.
Chairman of the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka says that the electricity tariff revision, which was approved by the Cabinet, cannot be implemented retrospectively. Speaking on the cost-reflective electricity tariff revision scheme that was approved by the Cabinet effective from the 1st of January 2023, Ratnayaka noted that the new tariff structure cannot be implemented with retrospective effect as per the relevant act.
ප්‍රශ්න තියෙන්නේ අපිට මේ යෝජනාව ලැබුණේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් දවස් 45ක 50ක කාලයක් යනවා ওই ක්‍රමවේදය අනුව යනකොට. ඒ වගේම අපි කතා කරනවා අඛණ්ඩ විදුලි සැපයීමක් අවශ්‍යයි කියලා. ඒ පිළිබඳව අපි අවධානය යොමු කරනවා. මේ විදිහට අතීතයට බලපාන විදිහට මේ විදුලි බිල සංශෝධනය කළ හැකියාවක් නැහැ. අන්තර්කාලීන විදුලි බිල සංශෝධනයක් කිරීමේ හැකියාවකුත් නැහැ. මෙතන ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ අපි මේ ගන්න මුදල සාධාරණද කියන එක. මේ දෙසැම්බර් 27 වෙනිදා කියලා තියෙනවා අපි නැප්තා ගන්නේ රුපියල් 164කට කියලා. අද උදේ එකක් එවලා තියෙනවා අපි දැන් නැප්තා ගන්නේ 220ට කියලා. මෙතන තමයි ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ. 55ක වෙනසක් වැදුනේ කොහොමද? ඒතොර ඒක සාධාරණ පිරිවැයක්ද සාධාරණ වියදමක්ද නැප්තා වලට ගෙවන්නේ. ඊටත් අමතරව අපි දන්නවා නැප්තා වලට රුපියල් 164ක් යන්නේ නැහැ. ඔක රුපියල් 80 වගේ ගෙන්න ගන්න පුළුවන්. දෙසැම්බර් 27 වෙනිදා ආපු යෝජනාවේ තියෙන්නේ ගල්ලංගුරු කිලෝ එකක් රුපියල් 144ක් වෙනවා. ඒතොර අද වෙලා තියෙනවා තවත් අලුතෙන් එකක් ගල්ලංගුරු කිලෝ එකක් රුපියල් 104ක් කියලා. ගල්ලංගුරු ලෝකේ වෙළඳ පොලේ අඩු වුණා. හැබැයි දෙසැම්බර් 27 ඉඳන් අද වෙනකන් රුපියල් 20කින් මේක අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා. එහෙම අඩුවීමක් අපි දැක්කේ නැහැ. ඒ ඉඳලා අපි කියන්නේ මේ ගණනය කිරීම සම්පූර්ණයෙන් වැරදි. අපි මේක සාධාරණ විදිහකට CB එකට අසාධාරණයක් වෙන්නේ නැති විදිහට Tamanට අවශ්‍ය කොස්ට් එක රිකවර් කර ගැනීම සඳහා මහජනතාවට සාධාරණයක් වෙන විදිහකට සීල කටයුතු කරනවා.
Well, coming up next after this break, we've invited to our studios Dr. Howard Nicholas, Sri Lankan-born economist, to talk about alternative solutions to Sri Lanka's economic crisis. Right after this break.
It's hard to keep up with the new when you're listening to the same old Slim Bread Week. A week for professionals.
Welcome back to the news. Cancel Sri Lanka's debt, global scholars told creditors in a document signed by some 200 economists and development experts. In the statement issued yesterday, eminent economists and scholars world over observed that amid Sri Lanka's crucial debt negotiations, all lenders, bilateral, multilateral and private, must share the burden of restructuring with assurance of additional financing in the near term. On this note, I've invited to our studios Dr. Howard Nicholas, Sri Lankan-born economist and chief instructor at ETIS Lanka. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
We're talking about a $2.9 billion standby arrangement with the IMF, a bailout package, and it looks like the assumption is that this $2.9 billion will bail out the country and Sri Lanka will be completely out of this crisis once that is disbursed. But how do you look at this, especially in a backdrop where, like I just said, 200 scholars and economists have signed a document asking lenders to look at this in a favorable way?
Well, First and foremost, I'd like to say that the 2.9 billion is not going to solve Sri Lanka's problems, and I don't think the IMF is claiming that either. Rather, what they're claiming is it'll unlock the door for more borrowing by Sri Lanka. Now, I think that's where Sri Lanka is going to compound the problems they currently have with yet more problems, and I would not recommend going down that road. As many people know, what I've recommended in the past is tackling the most fundamental problem. For 40 plus years, we have had a monster trade deficit, one of the largest in the world. Every year, it's in excess of 10% of GDP. So all the time, it's an accident waiting to happen. So the accident has happened in the past. We've gone to the IMF in the past. They've come with structural adjustment packages, and we're back to where we were before because we haven't tackled the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is not going to be tackled by the sorts of policies they're recommending and which the Sri Lankan government is acceding to. So I would say, yes, short term, we need to tighten the belt, and there the IMF can help us because they are not only talking about how the belt can be tightened, but relief for the poorer sections of the society in that context, which is new for the IMF. They haven't spoken about that before, and I think that's very encouraging. But what I would like to say is that we still need to put into place structural policies that remedy that fundamental trade imbalance if we're going to progress further.
Specifically on the debt restructuring process, Dr. Nicholas, what do you propose? How do you propose Sri Lanka approach this? We've been talking about obtaining creditor assurances, and now economists are also pressing that amidst this crucial time that lenders and creditors look at Sri Lanka's situation favorably. But how should we approach this?
Well, actually, I'm not an expert on that in the very... I mean, more my concern has been, since I've come here, and I think I mentioned this to you, some of the conditions that the IMF is imposing on Sri Lanka, and I'm worried about them. You know, one of those is the reform of the Monetary Law Act. And I'm very worried about that because, firstly, there's absolutely, in my view, no theoretical or empirical substance for this reform. It's based on a discarded, outmoded theory, and yet we seem to be the experiment ground for the IMF. Now, I would like them to come up with some substance to justify what they're recommending. In a nutshell, they're actually going to prevent the central bank from fulfilling the obligations of all central banks in the world, and that is the provision of liquidity. If they do that, next time we're hit by any sort of global shock, the buffers are off. In other words, the budget cannot be used as a buffer, and money printing cannot be used as a buffer. Let me just explain that. It's not only Sri Lanka that ran a huge budget deficit in 2021, every country in the world ran one. So, you know, if you like, everybody resorted to the same type of economic policy. That is normal when any country is hit with a shock. That's exactly what the government should do. However, this Monetary Law Act will prevent the government doing that. If the government then runs a budget deficit, the economy will be hammered by very high interest rates. And we're not talking of 30%. We could be looking at 40% or even 50% on treasury bills, one-year treasury bills.
Are you saying this will push Sri Lanka from bad to worse if we face budgetary concerns? And also, you did mention that this is a theory that is outdated and discarded by the Western world?
By the West. So let me just give you the example. Before he died, one of the architects of this theory, Milton Friedman, actually said that he now doesn't believe there is this link between money and expenditure, money and inflation. Okay, so that's just before he died. Secondly, in the mid-1990s, the central banks of the Western countries said, you can neither target the cash base of the system, nor can you control it. So in other words, the Western countries actually have given up on targeting money supply. And that was confirmed in 1995 when the chairman of the Federal Reserve, in testimony to the US Congress, said that the Federal Reserve doesn't even look at money supply figures when they set interest rates. So I'm bewildered. I don't understand what the IMF is telling Sri Lanka and where they're getting the substance for telling Sri Lanka. So I would issue a challenge to the IMF. Show us the data. I know they don't have the data because we have done comprehensive studies showing there is no such relationship that they're alluding to. So I issue this challenge directly to the IMF. Please show me the data.
We'd like to take this conversation forward, but before we wrap up this discussion, what do you think Sri Lanka's stand should be if you say this is not what the IMF should be advising Sri Lanka to do?
Well, I think there should be a discussion, a debate, and Sri Lanka should just ask the IMF to please give us some evidence, because what happens today is people don't provide evidence.
But do you think there is an alternative for Sri Lanka at this point?
Well, you see, you can't just impose things on a country with no rationality. There must be some rationality and some logic so that they can then sell it to the public. If there is no rationality and logic, let's assume that we're hit with another shock, as we all expect now, and interest rates soar, and we get a real financial crisis in this country, the government cannot turn around and say, well, sorry, we even discussed this and had open discussions and debates and so on, because there has been no discussion. And that's what worries me. I mean, maybe in the end we go down this road, but there should be an open discussion, and the IMF should be asked to justify this policy recommendation.
How do you forecast Sri Lanka's short to mid-term recovery?
Well, of course, everyone in the now has got on board with the idea that 2023 is going to be a bad year for the global economy. So Sri Lanka cannot expect to recover unless the global economy recovers. Obviously, this means to say we'll have more pain. But going beyond that, maybe if we recognize that the elephant in the room I mentioned, the trade imbalance, is the real problem that we have to cope with, maybe we'll actually start to do something about that, instead of actually just using sticking plaster everywhere.
I'd like to invite you once again to discuss further, but thank you very much for sharing your thoughts here at Hyde Park, and you of course extended a challenge to the IMF as well. We look forward to discussing further on this. We had with us Dr. Howard Nicholas, Sri Lankan-born economist, international economist, who is also the chief instructor at AdaDerana Lanka, joining us to talk about alternative solutions to Sri Lanka's crisis and the way forward in dealing with the International Monetary Fund. Welcome back to the news. The United National Party has decided to join hands with the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna to contest the upcoming local government election. This was announced by the party General Secretary Palitha Rangebandara. At a recent meeting with the electoral organisers of both parties, the UNP and the SLPP have agreed to contest certain electoral areas under the symbol of the elephant, some electoral areas under the symbol of the lotus bud, and other electoral areas under a common symbol. Rangebandara further said that a general consensus has been reached to contest the Colombo Municipal Council, Kandy Municipal Council and Putlam Urban Council under the symbol of elephant. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa says that the government has instructed the district secretaries not to accept deposits for local government elections until further notice. In a statement, the opposition leader urged the government to hold the election and added that they will get onto the streets with the people in order to secure the public's right to vote.
අද දිනේ අපිට අසන්නට ලැබෙනවා මෙන්න මේ ලිපිය හරහා කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලය තීන්දුව කරලා තියෙනවලු නැවත දැනුම් දෙන තුරු අපේක්ෂක අප තන්පත් මුදල් බාර ගැනීමෙන් වළකින ලෙසට කැබිනට් එක තීන්දුව කරලා සියලුම දිස්ත්‍රික් ලේකම්වරුන් මේ නියෝගය යවලා තියෙනවා. ජනාධිපති ලේකම් කාර්යාලයේ යම් යම් උපදේශකවරුන් යම් යම් නිලධාරීන් ඇතුළුව අපි මේවා හෙළිදරව් කරන්න පියවරෙන් පියවර පළාත් පාලන මැතිවරණයේ පැවැත්වීම වැළැක්වීමේ මහා ජාතික කුමන්ත්‍රණය ක්‍රියාත්මක කරලා අද එහි ප්‍රතිඵල නිකුත් වුණා. මම පැහැදිලිවම කියනවා ආණ්ඩුවට වහාම මැතිවරණය පවත්වන්න. ඔබට කිසිම අයිතියක් නැහැ මේ රටේ ජනතාවගේ ජනතා පරමාධිපත්‍ය කෙලසන්. මම රජයට පැහැදිලිවම අනතුරු ඇඟවීමක් කරනවා. මේ රටේ දසලක්ෂ සංඛ්‍යාත ජනතාවත් එක්ක අපි මහ පාරට බහිනවා. ජනතාවගේ ඡන්දයිතිය වෙනුවෙන්, ජනතා පරමාධිපත්‍ය වෙනුවෙන්.
Taking you to the Colombo Stock Exchange, the main index slid marginally for a fourth straight day as profit-taking was witnessed on soft logic companies and index heavyweights. On a positive note, tourism sector counters gained during the session on the back of over 20,000 arrivals reported in the first 7 months of the month, or rather on the first 7 days of the month. Although the index opened on an upward trajectory, reaching an intraday high of 8,448, profit-taking was visible during midday to close the day at a 1.5-month low of 8,368, losing 13 points. Meanwhile, investor activity collected treasury counters on the view of rates to ease in the upcoming bill and bond auctions and the monetary policy review meeting. As retail participation slowed down, turnover slid to 1.8 billion. Insurance sector continued to lead the turnover with a contribution of 4.7%. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded against other major currencies of the world during the day. And that's all the news for tonight. Do subscribe to our socials for the very latest. Thank you for watching. I'm Derana English. Good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.